You're exhausted. You can't remember words you've known your whole life. Your body feels like a stranger. And somewhere in the middle of the hot flashes and the brain fog and the 2 a.m. panic attacks, you started wondering, is this it? Is my best behind me? Here's the truth, nobody's telling you. What you're walking through isn't the end of your purpose, it's the beginning of your greatest transformation. This video is for every woman over 50 who still believes her faith story isn't finished. Because it's not. God met me in menopause at 53, and what he showed me changed everything. 11 chapters, 30 minutes, one journey from shame to strength. And wait until chapter 8. That's where everything clicks. The moment you realize you were never meant to walk this alone. Let's go. It happened during the 3rd verse of How Great Thou Art. One moment I was lifting my hands in praise, fully present, connected to God in that sacred space. The next moment, heat exploded from the center of my chest, like someone had lit a furnace inside my body. Within seconds, sweat poured down my face, my neck, soaking the collar of my blouse. My heart raced, my hands trembled. And all I could think was, I need to get out of here before everyone sees me falling apart. That's the thing about hot flashes. They don't ask permission. They don't wait for convenient moments. They crash into your life during the most intimate, sacred, vulnerable spaces, and suddenly, you're not thinking about God's greatness anymore. You're thinking about whether the woman next to you noticed. You're wondering if you should leave. You're mortified that your body betrayed you in the one place where you're supposed to feel safe. Here's what nobody tells you about this season. The symptoms aren't just physical. They're spiritual ambushes. Every hot flash becomes a reminder that something's changing, something's ending, something's being taken from you. And when it happens during worship, when it interrupts the very moment you're trying to connect with God, it feels like your body is sabotaging your faith. I stood there that Sunday morning, dabbing my face with a crumpled tissue from my purse, trying to sing through the embarrassment. But inside, I was asking God a question I'd never asked before. Why now? Why here? Why are you letting my body betray me in your house? And honestly, I didn't expect an answer that day. I just wanted to make it through the rest of the service without another wave hitting. But that moment, that mortifying, sweaty, shaky moment, was actually the beginning of something I couldn't see yet. It was the first crack in the armor I'd been wearing for decades. The armor that said I had to have it all together. The armor that said my worth was in my strength. The armor that said showing weakness, even physical weakness, was somehow failing God. You know that feeling when your body does something you can't control and suddenly you feel like you're not yourself anymore. That was me, at 53, in the middle of a worship service, discovering that menopause doesn't care about your calendar, your commitments, or your comfort level with vulnerability. But here's what I didn't know then, what I'm going to walk you through in this journey. That hot flash wasn't an interruption, it was an invitation. An invitation to meet God in a way I never had before. Not as the woman who had it all together, but as the woman whose body was forcing her to surrender control. This is where it starts. With the heat, with the embarrassment, with the moment you realize your body is telling you something your soul needs to hear. The brain fog hit me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was leading my weekly Bible study. We were discussing Philippians, a book I'd taught dozens of times, a passage I could recite in my sleep, or at least, I used to be able to. I opened my mouth to quote the verse, the one about forgetting what lies behind and straining toward what's ahead. I could see it in my mind, the page, the layout, even the margin notes I'd written years ago. But the words, gone, completely vanished. I stood there, mouth open, searching for something that had lived in my memory for 3 decades, and all I found was empty space. Give me just a second, I said, fumbling for my Bible. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. The women in the circle waited patiently, probably thinking I was just looking up the reference. They had no idea I was panicking. No idea that I couldn't remember if it was chapter 3 or chapter 4. No idea that the woman who'd been their Bible teacher for 10 years suddenly couldn't access the very scripture she'd built her ministry on. This wasn't just forgetting where you put your keys. This was losing pieces of yourself. The pieces that made you feel competent, capable, trustworthy. How do you lead a Bible study when you can't remember the Bible? How do you mentor younger women when your brain betrays you mid? How do you trust yourself with anything important when the most important words in your life just disappear? The shame was crushing. I finished that study session, but I drove home in tears. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for 20 minutes, afraid to go inside and face my own thoughts, because the thoughts wouldn't stop. You're losing it. You're not sharp anymore. Maybe it's time to step down. Maybe God's done with this chapter of your life. Maybe you're just not equipped to serve Him like this anymore. Here's the truth I wish someone had told me that day. Memory isn't your ministry. Your mind isn't your worth. And the God who called you doesn't need your perfect recall to use you powerfully. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was fear. I started writing everything down. Post-it notes everywhere. Reminders on my phone. I'd rehearse conversations before I had them, terrified of losing my train of thought. I stopped volunteering to pray out loud because what if I forgot what I was saying mid-prayer? I stopped accepting speaking invitations. I even considered quitting the Bible study altogether. The irony. While I was panicking about forgetting scripture, I was also forgetting something even more important. I was forgetting that God never asked me to be flawless. He asked me to be faithful. And faithful doesn't mean having every verse memorized. It means showing up even when you feel inadequate, even when your brain isn't cooperating. Even when you have to flip through your Bible in front of everyone because you can't pull the reference from memory anymore. That afternoon in my car, I did eventually remember something. Not the Philippians verse, no, that took me another hour and a concordance to find, but I remembered a different truth. A quieter one. The truth that God doesn't need my strength. He works through my weakness. I just didn't realize yet how much weaker I was about to feel. Or how much stronger His grace was about to become. Because the brain fog, that was just the beginning. Next came the anxiety. The kind that makes you Google things at 2 in the morning that you're terrified to ask anyone out loud. 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock for 40 minutes, my heart pounding for no reason, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario I could imagine. My husband was sound asleep next to me. The house was quiet, nothing was wrong, except everything felt wrong. I grabbed my phone, the blue light harsh in the darkness. My fingers trembled as I typed into the search bar, "Am I going crazy menopause?" Then I deleted it, retyped it. Menopause, anxiety, depression, losing my mind. Searched page after page of results. Forums filled with women describing exactly what I was feeling. The panic attacks that came out of nowhere. The intrusive thoughts. The sense that you're watching your life from outside your body. The fear that this isn't just hormones maybe, it's something darker. Something permanent. Something you'll never come back from. I read for 2 hours that night. Every story felt like mine. The woman who couldn't drive over bridges anymore because she was convinced she'd lose control. The one who stopped going to church because being in crowds made her chest tight. The one who cried in the grocery store parking lot because she couldn't remember why she came. And the comments. Hundreds of women saying, "Me too, I thought I was alone. I thought something was deeply, terribly wrong with me." Here's what broke me that night. It wasn't just the symptoms. It was the silence. Why had no one told me this could happen? 30 years in church, decades of women's ministry, Bible studies on every topic imaginable. And not once, not one single time had I heard a mature Christian woman talk honestly about what happens when your hormones crash and take your mental health with them. I felt betrayed. By my body, yes. But also by a Christian culture that taught me to rejoice always and be anxious for nothing. Without ever acknowledging that sometimes your brain chemistry makes those commands feel impossible. Where was the sermon series on navigating menopause as a woman of faith? Where was the small group for women whose bodies were changing and whose minds felt like they were unraveling? The next morning, I looked fine. Put on makeup, made coffee, smiled at my husband, went to work. But inside, I was screaming, and I couldn't tell anyone because what would I even say? Hi, I think I'm losing my grip on reality, but I'm supposed to trust God, so I guess I'm failing at both mental health and faith. That's the trap, isn't it? We think spiritual maturity means never struggling, never doubting, never lying awake at 2 a.m., wondering if you're fundamentally broken. So we perform. We paste on the smile. We show up to church and say I'm blessed when people ask how we're doing. And we suffer in silence because admitting the truth feels like admitting defeat. But, can I be real with you for a second? That Google search was one of the holiest things I did that year. Not because searching the internet is spiritual, but because I stopped pretending. I stopped performing. I admitted, even if only to a search engine in the middle of the night, that I needed help, that I didn't have this figured out, that something was happening to me that I couldn't white-knuckle my way through with willpower and prayer alone. Look how far you've already come in this journey. You've walked through the embarrassment of the hot flash, the fear of losing your memory, and now the terror of losing your mind. And you're still here, still listening, still believing there might be hope on the other side of this. Real talk, have you felt this way too? Drop a comment and tell me. I read every single one. Because here's what I discovered after that desperate night of Googling. What I found wasn't just information. It was permission. Permission to be human. Permission to struggle. Permission to believe that God meets us in the 2 a.m. panic attacks just as much as He meets us in the Sunday morning worship. If this first insight spoke to you, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss where this journey is taking us. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happened next. Because just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, I found the verse that changed everything. The one that made me see menopause and God in a completely different light. That's coming up next. And honestly, it's where the real transformation begins. I found it on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the Google spiral. I wasn't looking for it. I was just doing my morning quiet time, barely holding on to the discipline, honestly, because some days even opening my Bible felt like lifting weights. But that morning, I opened to Isaiah, chapter 43, and there it was, verse 19, staring back at me like God had written it in neon. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'd read that verse 100 times before, quoted it, taught it, applied it to job transitions and church seasons and new ministries. But that morning, something shifted. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reading it as a promise about external circumstances. I was reading it as a promise about my body, about this season, about menopause. See, I am doing a new thing. Not I'm ending the old thing and leaving you with nothing. Not you're broken now. And this is just decline from here. But I am doing a new thing. Present tense, active, intentional. God was doing something in this season not despite the changes in my body, but through them. Now it springs up, like growth, like birth, like something breaking through ground that looked dead but was actually just dormant. All this time, I'd been mourning what was ending. The fertility, the predictable cycles, the version of myself I'd known for decades. But what if something was also beginning? What if this wasn't just loss? What if it was transition? What if God was clearing space for something I couldn't even perceive yet? Do you not perceive it? And there was the gut punch. No, I didn't perceive it. I was so busy grieving and panicking and Googling at 2 a.m. that I completely missed the possibility that God might actually be up to something. That this season wasn't punishment or abandonment, or the beginning of irrelevance. It was preparation. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee going cold, tears running down my face. Not sad tears this time. Relief tears. The kind that come when you realize you've been holding your breath for months and someone just gave you permission to exhale. Here's what changes everything. We've been trained to see menopause as an ending. The end of fertility. The end of youth. The end of feeling like ourselves. And in a culture obsessed with staying young, staying relevant, staying productive, an ending feels like a death. But what if we've been reading the story wrong? What if menopause isn't a period, it's a comma? What if it's not the conclusion of your purpose, but the transition into the next chapter? Think about it like this. You know how a tree loses its leaves in fall? For months, it looks dead. Bare branches. No color. No life. If you didn't know better, you'd assume that tree was finished. But underneath, in the invisible places, something powerful is happening. The tree is redirecting its energy, strengthening its roots, preparing for a spring that's still months away. And when spring comes, that tree doesn't just survive, it flourishes in ways it never could have if it tried to hold on to its summer leaves through the winter. That's what God was showing me. Menopause is my fall season. It looks like loss. It feels like endings. But underneath, in the places I can't see yet, God is redirecting my energy, deepening my roots, preparing me for a flourishing I can't even imagine yet. And if I spend this whole season mourning the leaves, I'll miss the root work. So here's your one doable action step today. Not complicated. Not overwhelming. Just this. Find Isaiah 43-19 in your Bible. Write it on a note card. Put it somewhere you'll see it every single day. Your bathroom mirror, your coffee maker, your car dashboard. And every time you feel a hot flash, every time you forget a word, every time your body reminds you that things are changing, read those words out loud. See, I am doing a new thing. Say it until you believe it. Say it until your body hears it. Say it until your spirit remembers that God doesn't do endings, He does transformations. If this just hit your heart, pause right now and share this video with that one friend who needs to hear it. Send it to her on WhatsApp. Tell her this is for her. Because here's what I'm starting to understand, and what we're going to explore deeper in the chapters ahead. God doesn't waste anything. Not your youth, not your fertility, and definitely not your menopause. Every season has a design. Every transition has a purpose. And if that's true, if menopause exists by divine design and not cosmic accident, then we need to understand why. That's where we're going next. To the question that changed everything. What if menopause isn't just biology? What if it's theology? What if God designed this season on purpose, for a purpose? Wait until you hear this, it's going to shift how you see your entire life. Here's a question nobody asks in church. Why did God create menopause? I mean, really, if He wanted us to keep bearing children our whole lives, He could have designed our bodies that way. If He wanted us to stay in one season forever, He had the power to do that, but He didn't. He built a timer into our biology. He designed us to transition. And that design choice, it's not random. Think about every other season God created. Spring doesn't apologize for not being summer. Fall doesn't try to hold on to its green leaves. Winter doesn't panic because it's not blooming. Each season has a purpose. Each one does something the others can't. And they're all necessary for the full cycle of life. But somehow, when it comes to the seasons of a woman's life, we've bought into this lie that only one season matters. The fertile years. The young years. The years when your body is producing and performing and proving its worth through what it can create. And when that season ends, we act like the story's over. Except God doesn't operate that way. He doesn't build obsolescence into His design. He doesn't create something beautiful and then just let it decay without purpose. So if menopause exists, if it's part of the original blueprint for how a woman's life unfolds, then it must serve a function. It must have meaning. It must be necessary for something. Here's what I'm learning. Menopause is God's invitation into wisdom. For decades, your body's energy went into creating life, literally. Whether you had children or not, your monthly cycle was preparing for the possibility. Month after month, year after year, your body was focused outward, ready to nurture, ready to give, ready to pour itself out. That's beautiful. That's sacred. But it's not the only sacred thing. What if menopause is when God says, now it's time to redirect that creative energy inward? Not selfishly. Not in a way that makes you less generous or less loving. But in a way that deepens you, matures you, transforms you into the kind of woman who doesn't just create life, she sustains it, she mentors it, she speaks wisdom into it. There's a reason older women in Scripture are called to teach younger women. Titus 2 doesn't assign that role to the 20-somethings. It assigns it to the women who've walked through seasons, who've survived transitions, who've learned things in the fire that you simply cannot learn in the ease of youth. But here's the catch: you can't teach what you haven't internalized. You can't mentor from a place of wisdom if you spent your transitional season trying to cling to your previous one. Menopause is where wisdom becomes available. But only if you stop resisting the season and start receiving it. Look at it like this. Imagine you're a musician. For the first half of your life, you're learning your instrument, practicing scales, building technique, performing for audiences. It's active, visible, measurable. But then there comes a season where you're not performing as much anymore. You're composing. You're mentoring younger musicians. You're doing the work that only experience can do, the work of distilling everything you've learned into something you can pass on. That's not a lesser season. That's not a retirement from relevance. That's the season where your life becomes a legacy instead of just a performance. And honestly, I think that's what terrifies us most. Because legacy work is quieter. It's less visible. It doesn't get the applause that performance does. You can't measure it the same way. But ask any musician what's more valuable, the performer or the composer, and they'll tell you, both are essential. The performer brings the music to life in the moment. But the composer creates music that outlives them. Menopause is your transition from performer to composer. From the one on stage to the one writing the music that others will sing long after you're gone. And yes, that transition is hard. Yes, it involves loss. But it also involves gaining something most women never discover because they spend this whole season wishing they were still 25. So here's what you need to hold on to. God designed menopause as a doorway, not a dead end. It's the threshold between the life you spent building and the legacy you're meant to leave. And every uncomfortable symptom, every frustrating change, every moment where your body reminds you that you're not who you used to be, that's not punishment. That's redirection. Your body is telling you, stop striving to stay in the old season. There's a new one waiting, and it requires a different kind of energy, a different kind of strength, a different kind of beauty that only comes from being refined in the fire of transition. And here's where it gets even better. Because if God designed this season, and if Jesus walked this earth fully understanding what it means to be human, then we have to ask, what would Jesus say about menopause? What would he say to the woman in the hot flash? To the one who can't remember scripture? To the one Googling at 2 a.m.? That's the question that absolutely wrecked me. And the answer? It's going to wreck you too in the best possible way. I spent 6 months ashamed of my body. 6 months apologizing to my husband when I couldn't sleep. To my coworkers when I had to step outside during a hot flash. To myself every single time I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. I was carrying shame like a second skin, and I didn't even realize it until I asked myself one simple question. What would Jesus actually say to me about this? Not the sanitized Sunday school Jesus, not the Jesus of platitudes and bumper stickers, but the Jesus who touched lepers when everyone else crossed the street. The Jesus who stopped for the bleeding woman when she was considered unclean. The Jesus who defended the woman caught in adultery when the religious people wanted to stone her. That Jesus, what would he say? And honestly, I think he'd say what he always says, when someone's carrying shame they were never meant to carry. Why are you apologizing for being human? Because that's what we're doing, isn't it? We're apologizing for our bodies doing exactly what bodies do. We're carrying shame for a biological process that's as natural as breathing. We're treating menopause like a moral failure instead of a life transition. And somewhere along the way, we started believing that suffering in silence was the same thing as suffering with grace. But Jesus never asked anyone to suffer in silence. He asked them to bring their suffering to him. The woman with the issue of blood didn't hide at home for 12 years thinking, I should be able to handle this myself. She pushed through the crowd. She reached out. She admitted she needed healing. And Jesus didn't rebuke her for making a scene. He called her daughter. He gave her peace. He sent her away whole. You know what strikes me about that story? She'd been bleeding for 12 years. 12 years of her body doing something she couldn't control. 12 years of being considered unclean. 12 years of isolation and shame, and probably wondering if God had forgotten her. And in one moment, one desperate, courageous moment of admitting she needed help, everything changed. Not because Jesus fixed her body first and then accepted her, but because he saw her suffering, honored her courage, and met her exactly where she was. Here's the truth we need to hear. Jesus doesn't love you more when your hormones are balanced. He doesn't love you less when you're sweating through your shirt in public. He doesn't measure your spiritual maturity by how gracefully you handle brain fog or how cheerfully you endure insomnia. He loves you because you're his. Period. Full stop. No conditions attached. And the shame you're carrying, that's not from him. That's from a culture that worships youth. From a church that sometimes values performance over authenticity. From a world that tells you your value is in what you produce, not in who you are. But Jesus flips that script every single time. He valued the widow's 2 coins more than the rich man's abundance. He chose fishermen over scholars. He elevated children when everyone else dismissed them. And he would absolutely, without question, look at you in your menopause and say, "Come to me." Bring your exhaustion. Bring your confusion. Bring your hot flashes and your forgotten words and your 2 a.m. panic attacks. Bring all of it. Because my yoke is easy and my burden is light, and I never asked you to carry shame on top of everything else. Think about it like this. Imagine you have a daughter, and she's going through puberty. Her body's changing. Her emotions are all over the place. She's crying one minute and angry the next, and she doesn't understand what's happening to her. Would you shame her for that? Would you tell her to keep it together? Stop being so emotional. Handle it better. Or would you pull her close and say, "I know this is hard. I know your body feels out of control. But you're not broken. You're just changing. And I'm here with you through every confusing, uncomfortable moment of it." That's what grace sounds like, and that's exactly what Jesus offers you right now. Not shame for struggling. Not disappointment for not having it all together. But compassion for the hard work of transitioning from one season to another. So here's your action step. This one might feel uncomfortable, but it's important. I want you to forgive yourself. Out loud, say it. I forgive myself for not being perfect through this transition. I forgive myself for the days I didn't handle it well. I forgive myself for being human. Say it until the shame loosens its grip. Say it until you believe that grace is bigger than your worst day. Think of someone in your life who's walking through this exact season. Text them this video right now. Don't wait, they need this today. Because here's what happens when you trade shame for grace. You stop hiding, you stop performing, and you finally have the energy to do what actually matters in this season, which is learning how to care for yourself in a way that honors both your body and your spirit. And that's not selfish. That's not weak. That's wisdom. That's the practical, tangible work of living out grace in real time. Which is exactly what we're diving into next. The strategies that actually work when your body's in transition and your faith needs to be more than theory. This is where everything we've talked about becomes real. Where theology meets Tuesday morning. And honestly, this next section might save your life. Here's what nobody tells you when you're drowning. Theology doesn't fix insomnia. Grace doesn't regulate your hormones. And knowing God has a purpose for this season doesn't make the hot flashes stop. At some point, you have to get practical. You have to figure out how to actually live in this body, with this brain, in this season, without losing your mind or your faith in the process. So let's talk about what actually works. Not theory, not someday, but today, right now, in the middle of the mess. First, your body. And I'm going to say something that might sound controversial in Christian circles. You cannot spiritualize your way out of a hormone deficiency. You can't pray away a chemical imbalance. God gave you a physical body that operates on physical principles. And honoring that isn't a lack of faith, it's stewardship. It's taking care of the temple He gave you. For me, that meant finally talking to my doctor. Not just suffering in silence and hoping it would pass. Not just white-knuckling through the symptoms because I thought asking for help was admitting defeat. I walked into that appointment and said, "This is what's happening to my body, and I need help." And you know what? That wasn't weakness. That was wisdom. Some women need hormone therapy. Some need supplements. Some need dietary changes, or different exercise rhythms or sleep support. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, and that's okay. But what's not okay is martyring yourself on the altar of, I should be able to handle this alone. God designed community. He designed medicine. He designed professionals who can help. Use them. Here's what worked for me. I started tracking my symptoms. Not obsessively, but honestly. I noticed that sugar made my hot flashes worse. That late-night screen time destroyed my already fragile sleep. That skipping meals made my anxiety spike. Small things, manageable things. But when I started paying attention and making tiny adjustments, my body started cooperating a little more. I also had to redefine what exercise meant. For years, I pushed myself hard long runs, intense workouts, proving I still had it. But my body in this season, it needed something different. It needed gentleness, walks instead of runs, stretching instead of straining, movement that restored energy instead of depleting it. And honestly, that was hard for my ego. But my body thanked me. Now, your mind. Because brain fog and anxiety aren't just inconveniences, they're isolating. They make you feel like you're losing yourself. And you need strategies that actually address what's happening in your head. I started writing everything down. Not because I'm losing my mind permanently, but because my working memory is overloaded right now. So I keep a small notebook with me. Tasks, thoughts, prayer requests. Anything I don't want to forget. It's not a sign of decline, it's an accommodation. It's working with my brain instead of against it. I also had to get ruthless about margin. You know what makes brain fog worse? Trying to do 17 things at once, overcommitting, saying yes when your body's screaming no. So I started pruning. I stepped back from committees that drained me. I said no to events I used to force myself to attend. I protected my energy like the precious resource it is, and the anxiety. I had to stop treating it like a spiritual problem that just needed more prayer. Yes, I pray. Yes, God meets me there. But I also learned breathing techniques. I started taking magnesium before bed. I limited caffeine after noon. I gave myself permission to leave situations that made my chest tight. Prayer and practical tools, both not either. Here's the spirit part, and this is where it all comes together. Because your spiritual practices have to adapt too. You can't keep doing devotions the same way you did at 30 and expect it to feed you at 53. Your soul needs something different now. I used to wake up at 5 a.m. for a full hour of Bible study and prayer. Structured, rigorous, productive. But in this season, when sleep is fragile and my brain doesn't fully wake up until 7 a.m., that 5 a.m. routine was making me resent my quiet time instead of treasure it. So I changed it. I gave myself permission to meet God at 7 a.m. instead. To sit with one verse instead of reading 3 chapters. To journal instead of checking off a Bible reading plan. And you know what? God met me there. He didn't love me less because I adjusted my routine. He loved me right where I was exhausted, foggy, doing the best I could with what I had. I also started praying differently. Less fix me prayers, and more be with me prayers. Less take this away, and more give me what I need to walk through this. Because sometimes the miracle isn't removal, it's presence. Sometimes God doesn't calm the storm. He calms you in the storm. So here's your practical step for today. Pick one thing. Just one. Don't try to overhaul your entire life. Pick one area, body, mind, or spirit, and make one small adjustment this week. Maybe it's scheduling that doctor's appointment. Maybe it's buying the notebook. Maybe it's moving your quiet time to when you're actually awake. One thing. Do it today. Which of these truths landed deepest for you? Write it in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what's stirring in your heart. Because here's what I discovered when I started implementing these strategies. I wasn't meant to do this alone. The practical stuff helped, yes, but what really saved me? What kept me from giving up entirely? It was the women who showed up. The ones who stopped performing and started being real. The ones who created the space I desperately needed but didn't know how to ask for. That's what's coming next. The story of the support group that literally saved my sanity. And if you think you don't need community, if you think you can handle this season, wait until you hear what happened when I finally stopped trying to be strong and started being honest. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car in the church parking lot for 10 minutes, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel, telling myself I didn't need this. I was fine. I could handle it. I'd handled everything else in my life. Why would this be any different? But the truth, I wasn't fine. I was drowning. And the only reason I was in that parking lot at all was because my friend Karen, the one who'd known me since college, the one who could see through my "I'm blessed" smile, had literally texted me the night before and said, "If you don't show up tomorrow night, I'm coming to your house." So I went. I walked into that room in the church basement, and there they were. 8 women, ranging from early 50s to late 60s, sitting in a circle with coffee and cookies like this was just another Bible study. Except it wasn't. Because when the facilitator opened with "Let's go around and share one true thing about how you're really doing," the floodgates opened. The first woman said, "I'm so angry all the time and I don't know why." The second one said, "I can't sleep, and when I do, I wake up drenched in sweat." The third one started crying before she even spoke, and all she managed to say was, "I thought I was the only one," and something broke open in me. Because for months I'd been performing, pretending, smiling through the symptoms, acting like I had my life together, when internally I was barely holding on. And suddenly, in that basement room with those 8 women, I didn't have to pretend anymore. When it was my turn, I said, "I forgot scripture I've known for 30 years, and I'm terrified God's done with me." And instead of judgment, instead of spiritual advice, instead of someone trying to fix me, they just nodded. One woman reached over and squeezed my hand. Another said, "Me too." Last week I blanked on my own grandson's name. That's when I realized something crucial. Isolation is the enemy's favorite weapon in this season. Because when you're alone with your symptoms, they feel like evidence that something's wrong with you specifically. But when you're in a room with other women experiencing the exact same things, suddenly it's not pathology, it's solidarity. It's not failure, it's just being human. We met every other Tuesday for 6 months. And those meetings became my lifeline. Not because anyone had all the answers, not because we prayed away the menopause or found a magic solution, but because we stopped pretending. We showed up messy. We told the truth. We laughed about the ridiculous parts and cried about the hard parts, and somewhere in the middle of all that honesty, we found something we'd been missing: permission to be exactly where we were. Here's what community does that nothing else can. It normalizes your experience. When you hear another woman describe the exact hot flash you had yesterday, the exact anxiety spiral you woke up in, the exact moment of forgetting that made you panic, it stops being your personal failure and starts being a shared human experience. And that shift, that changes everything. But it's more than just validation. Community also brings wisdom you can't access alone. One woman shared the supplement that finally helped her sleep. Another talked about the therapist who specialized in hormonal transitions. Someone else mentioned a book that reframed her entire understanding of this season. We weren't just commiserating, we were building a collective knowledge base. We were becoming resources for each other. And the spiritual piece, that was the most surprising part. Because we didn't start with prayer and end with prayer like every other church group I'd been part of. We started with truth. Raw, uncomfortable, unseemly truth. And then, after we'd all been honest about where we really were, someone would say, "Can we pray?" And those prayers, they were the most powerful prayers I'd ever heard, because they weren't pretty. They weren't polished. They were desperate and honest and full of faith that somehow, God was big enough to meet us in the mess. One night, Janet shared that she'd stopped going to church because she couldn't handle the crowds anymore. The hot flashes, the anxiety, the fear of having a panic attack in the middle of worship. She said it like a confession, like she expected us to shame her. Instead, Linda said, "I get it. Some Sundays I sit in my car through the whole service and listen on the radio. And Teresa said, I started going to the early service because there's fewer people and I can leave if I need to. No judgment, no spiritual platitudes. Just women meeting each other exactly where they were and saying, your faith isn't measured by your ability to sit through a church service. God knows where you are. Here's your action step, and it's the most important one yet. Find your people. I don't care if it's 2 women or 10. I don't care if you meet at church or in someone's living room or on a Zoom call, but you cannot do this season alone. You were not designed to carry this by yourself. Find the women who will let you tell the truth. Find the ones who won't try to fix you or spiritualize your symptoms or make you feel like you're failing for struggling. And if a group doesn't exist, start one. Send a text to 3 women you suspect might be walking through this too. Say, can we meet for coffee and just be honest about what's really happening? That's it. That's how mine started. One brave woman who was tired of pretending. If you're in this season, or you know someone who is, and this community truth just landed on you, share this video in your family WhatsApp group right now. Let this be the gift you give them today. Because here's what that support group taught me. I'd spent my whole Christian life learning how to serve others, how to show up for people in crisis, how to be the strong one, the stable one, the one with answers. But I'd never learned how to receive. I'd never learned how to be the one in crisis, how to be the one who needed support instead of giving it. And that's the transition menopause demands. It forces you out of performance mode and into receiving mode. It strips away your self-sufficiency and confronts you with your need. And if you let it, if you stop fighting it and start leaning into it, it transforms not just how you see yourself, but how you practice your faith entirely. That's what happened to me. And that's what we're exploring next. Because once I stopped trying to maintain my old faith practices and started adjusting them for this season, everything shifted. My relationship with God deepened in ways I never experienced in my strong years. And honestly, I wouldn't trade this intimacy for all the strength I used to have. The breakdown happened during my morning quiet time. I'd been fighting it for weeks, the exhaustion, the inability to concentrate, the way my Bible reading felt more like an obligation than a conversation. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee and my study Bible and my prayer journal, trying to force myself through the same routine I'd maintained for 20 years. And I just couldn't do it anymore. I closed the Bible, put my head in my hands, and I said out loud to God, I don't know how to do this anymore. And in the quiet that followed, I felt something shift. Not an audible voice, not a lightning bolt revelation, just a gentle awareness settling over me like a blanket. Then stop trying to do it the old way. For 2 decades, I'd measured spiritual maturity by consistency. Same time, same place, same structure. Read 3 chapters, journal for 15 minutes, pray through my list. Check, check, check. And when my body and mind changed in menopause, when I couldn't maintain that structure anymore, I thought I was failing at faith. But what if I wasn't failing? What if I was just being invited into something different? Here's the truth that set me free. Spiritual disciplines are supposed to draw you closer to God, not make you feel like you're constantly falling short. And if a practice that once brought life is now bringing shame, it's time to adjust, not abandon, adjust. I started with my morning routine. Instead of forcing myself awake at 5 a.m. when my body desperately needed sleep, I started meeting God whenever I actually woke up. Some days that was 6 a.m., some days it was 7:30. And you know what? God was there every single time. He didn't love me less because I slept in. He didn't dock points from my spiritual scorecard. I also gave myself permission to shorten my reading. Some mornings, 1 verse was enough. 1 verse that I could sit with, meditate on, let sink into my soul while I drank my coffee and watched the sun come up. Quality over quantity, depth over distance. Prayer changed to, I used to have this elaborate prayer list, pages of people and situations I'd committed to pray for. And it was good, it was faithful. But in this season, when my brain was foggy and my energy was limited, that list became a weight instead of a worship. So I simplified. I started praying as I went through my day. Short prayers, honest prayers. God, help me remember that name. Jesus, I need peace right now. Holy Spirit, give me the words. It felt less structured, less impressive, but honestly, it was more connected. Because I wasn't performing prayers at a designated time, I was living in conversation with God all day long. I also had to rethink church. For years, I was there every time the doors opened. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday evening, volunteering in 3 ministries, always available, always serving. But in this season, that pace was killing me. And one Sunday morning, sitting in my car having a panic attack in the parking lot, I finally heard what God had been trying to tell me for months. I didn't ask you to burn out for me, so I scaled back. I stepped down from 2 of the 3 ministries. I started skipping evening services when my body was too exhausted. I gave myself permission to watch the sermon online when going in person felt overwhelming. And instead of guilt, I felt relief. Because my worth wasn't in my church attendance. My value wasn't in my volunteerism. God wanted my heart, not my exhaustion. Here's what I learned about faith in this season. It's less about doing and more about being. Less about proving and more about receiving. Less about strength and more about surrender. And those aren't lesser forms of spirituality, they're actually deeper ones. They're just harder to measure. Harder to put on a resume. Harder to brag about at women's Bible study. Think about it like this. When Jesus called his disciples, he didn't say, "Come and work for me." He said, "Come and be with me." The doing flowed from the being. The ministry flowed from the relationship. But somewhere along the way, we flipped the script. We made Christianity about activity instead of intimacy. About performance instead of presence. Menopause disrupts that. It strips away your ability to perform at the same level. And in that disruption, it offers you a gift. The invitation to discover what faith looks like when it's not based on what you can do, but on who you are in Christ. So here's your action step. Audit your spiritual practices, not to shame yourself, not to add more to your plate, but to ask honestly, what's still bringing life? What's become obligation? What needs to be released? What needs to be and then make one change. Just one. Adjust one practice to fit who you are now. Not who you were 5 years ago. We're almost there, and if these truths are shifting something in you, subscribe so we can keep walking this path together. Because here's where this whole journey has been leading. All the symptoms, all the struggles, all the adjustments and accommodations and moments of surrender. They weren't random. They weren't punishment. They were preparation. And what I discovered on the other side of that preparation, what finally clicked into place after months of feeling lost, is the truth that changes absolutely everything. That's next. The moment when I finally understood, this whole season wasn't about what I was losing. It was about what I was being prepared for. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you understand it, your entire life makes sense in a way it never did before. This is the pivot point. This is where everything shifts. And I promise you, you don't want to miss this. It was a Saturday morning in June. I was sitting on my back porch with my Bible and my coffee, watching the sunrise, and I wasn't fighting anything for the first time in a year. I wasn't resisting the hot flash that had woken me up at 5 a.m. I wasn't panicking about the word I couldn't remember yesterday. I wasn't mourning who I used to be. I was just, there, present still. And in that stillness, a question dropped into my spirit like a stone into water. What if all of this has been preparation? Preparation. Not punishment. Not a cruel joke. Not God's way of sidelining me. But preparation for something I couldn't see yet. Something I was being shaped for. Something that required exactly the kind of refining fire I'd been walking through. I grabbed my journal and started writing. Fast. Urgent. Like I was downloading something I'd been too busy surviving to notice. And this is what poured out. Every single thing menopause stripped away was something I'd been using to prove my worth instead of resting in my identity. My physical strength, I'd been using it to prove I could keep up. That age wasn't slowing me down, that I was still valuable. My sharp memory, I'd been using it to prove I was competent, that I deserved my position. that I had something to offer. My ability to juggle 17 things at once. I'd been using it to prove I was indispensable, that people needed me, that I mattered. But here's the thing about proving. It never stops. You can never prove enough. You can never do enough. You can never be enough. Because proving is built on fear, and fear has no finish line. So God, in His infinite mercy, started removing the things I was using to prove myself, not to destroy me, to free me, to show me that my worth isn't in my strength, in my surrender. My value isn't in my performance, it's in my presence. My identity isn't in what I can do, it's in whose I am. This is preparation. Preparation to step into the most important season of my life, not as the woman who has it all together, but as the woman who's learned to trust God in the falling apart. Not as the mentor who's perfected everything, but as the guide who's walked through the fire and can say honestly, I know the way because I've been there. You know what younger women don't need from us? They don't need our highlight reel. They don't need our curated version of faith, where everything's neat and tidy, and we've got all the answers. What they need is our truth. They need to see women who've survived transitions, who've walked through seasons that felt like death, and discovered resurrection on the other side. Who can look them in the eye when they're drowning and say, I know, I've been there, and you're going to make it. But I couldn't offer that from a place of strength and certainty. I could only offer it from a place of weakness and faith, and menopause. Menopause brought me to that place. It stripped away every prop I'd been leaning on and forced me to lean on God alone. Think about Moses, 40 years in the wilderness before he was ready to lead Israel out of Egypt, not because he wasn't capable at 40, but because at 40, he was still operating in his own strength. At 80, after decades of shepherding sheep in the desert, after every illusion of self-sufficiency had been burned away, that's when God said, now you're ready. Or think about David, years in caves, running from Saul, feeling forgotten and forsaken. But it was in those caves that he wrote the Psalms. It was in the wilderness that he learned to worship in the waiting. It was in the dark seasons that he discovered a depth of faith he never would have found in the palace. Preparation seasons don't feel like preparation. They feel like punishment. They feel like wasted time. They feel like God forgot about you, or put you on the shelf, or decided you're not useful anymore. But what if the opposite is true? What if these are the seasons where God is doing His deepest work? Where He's not just using you, He's transforming you into someone who can carry the weight of what He's preparing you for. Here's what I'm being prepared for. And maybe you are too. I'm being prepared to be a truth teller in a culture of performance. To be a voice of authenticity in a sea of filters and facades. To be a woman who can sit with other women in their pain and not rush to fix it, because I've learned to sit with my own pain and let God meet me there. I'm being prepared to lead from a place of humility instead of authority. To mentor from a place of I'm still learning to instead of let me tell you how to do it right. To offer wisdom that comes from experience, not just from Bible knowledge. I'm being prepared to be the kind of older woman that Titus 2 talks about. Not the woman who has her life perfectly together, but the woman who's learned to trust God when life falls apart. The woman who's discovered that grace is sufficient even when strength is gone. The woman who can look at the next generation and say, you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be faithful. And faithful looks like showing up broken and letting God work with what you bring. So here's your action step, and this might be the most important one yet. Write down this sentence and finish it honestly. What if God is using menopause to prepare me for ... Single quotes, whatever comes to mind. Write it down. Don't edit it. Don't dismiss it. Just let yourself imagine what might be waiting on the other side of this preparation season. If this just shifted your perspective, share this with someone who's still in the middle of the struggle. Send it to your WhatsApp group. Tell them, this is for us. Because this truth, this reframe from punishment to preparation, it changes everything. Everything we've covered leads to this final truth. You're not who you used to be. And that's not tragedy, that's transformation. You're not losing yourself in this season. You're discovering who you were always meant to become. And that woman, the one being refined in the fire of menopause. She's not weaker than who you were. She's stronger in all the ways that actually matter. She's the grace-filled warrior, and she's who you're becoming. That's where we're going next. To the identity that rises from the ashes of the old one. To the woman you're being prepared to be. And once you see her once, you catch a glimpse of who God's shaping you into, will never want to go back to who you were before. This is it. This is the finale. And it's going to change how you see yourself forever. I caught a glimpse of her 3 weeks ago. The woman I'm becoming. I was sitting in that same support group, and a younger woman, maybe 45, had just joined us. She was terrified, shaking, crying as she described the hot flash that had ambushed her at work. The panic that maybe this was early menopause, the fear that her life was over before she even hit 50. And without thinking, I reached across the circle, took her hand, and said something I couldn't have said a year ago. You're going to be okay. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but this season isn't the end, it's the beginning, and I'm going to walk through it with you. The old me couldn't have said that. The old me was too busy drowning in my own fear, too focused on my own symptoms, too consumed with trying to get back to who I used to be. But this version of me, the one forged in the fire of hot flashes and forgotten words and 2 a.m. Google searches, she can sit with someone else's fear because she's learned to sit with her own. She can offer hope because she's found it. She can be steady because she's discovered that steady doesn't mean unshaken, it means anchored. That's the grace-filled warrior, not the woman who never struggles. Not the woman who's got it all figured out. But the woman who's learned to fight with grace instead of force. Who's learned that surrender isn't weakness, it's the ultimate act of strength. Who's discovered that you can be both tender and fierce, both vulnerable and powerful, both broken and whole at the exact same time. Here's what this identity looks like in real life. It looks like showing up to church even when your body's betraying you, because your faith isn't dependent on feeling strong. It looks like asking for help without apologizing, because you've learned that needing people isn't failure, it's human. It looks like setting boundaries without guilt, because you finally understand that protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's sacred stewardship. The grace-filled warrior knows when to push and when to rest. She knows when to speak and when to be silent. She knows when to serve and when to step back. And she's not making those decisions based on what other people expect or what she used to be capable of. She's making them based on what God's asking of her in this moment, in this season, with this body. She's also learned something revolutionary. Her weakness is her superpower. Not in spite of it, because of it. Because it's in her weakness that God's strength shows up most powerfully. It's in her limitations that she's forced to depend on Him instead of herself. It's in her inability to do everything that she discovers God never asked her to. You know what the most beautiful part of this identity is? It's contagious. When you stop performing and start being real, you give other women permission to do the same. When you admit you're struggling, you create space for them to admit it too. When you show up imperfect and still beloved, you demolish the lie that God only uses perfect people. That younger woman in my support group, she messaged me last week and said, "Thank you for not pretending. Thank you for showing me what it looks like to walk through this with faith instead of fear." And honestly, that's the legacy I want to leave. Not the legacy of the woman who never struggled, but the legacy of the woman who struggled and kept going anyway. Here's the warrior part. Because grace-filled doesn't mean passive. It doesn't mean you just accept everything and never fight back. The warrior part is this. You fight for your peace. You fight for your boundaries. You fight for the truth that this season has purpose. You fight against the lies that you're finished, worthless, invisible, irrelevant. You wage war on shame. You stand firm against the cultural narrative that your value expires when your fertility does. But you fight with grace, which means you extend to yourself the same compassion you'd extend to anyone else. You speak to your body with kindness instead of contempt. You treat your limitations with understanding instead of frustration. You give yourself permission to be human, to be in process, to be becoming instead of already arrived. Think about it like this. A warrior in armor looks powerful. impenetrable, invincible. But that armor is also heavy, exhausting, and it keeps you at a distance from everyone around you. The grace-filled warrior. She puts down the armor, not because she's weak, but because she's learned that vulnerability is where real strength lives. She lets people see her scars. She admits when she's tired. She asks for help when she needs it. And somehow, in that honesty, she becomes more powerful than she ever was in the armor. So here's your final action step. And this one's not about doing, it's about declaring. I want you to say this out loud, right now, wherever you are. I am a grace-filled warrior. I am stronger in my weakness than I ever was in my strength. And God is not finished with my story. Say it until you believe it. Say it when the hot flashes come. Say it when you forget the word. Say it when you're lying awake at 2 a.m., wondering if you'll ever feel like yourself again. Because you won't feel like your old self. That's the point. You're becoming someone new, someone deeper, someone more beautiful in all the ways that actually last. Here's my final question for you. What's the one thing you're committing to change today after this video? Write it in the comments. Make it real. I'll be cheering you on. And listen, if you've walked this entire journey with me, if you've stayed through all 11 chapters, if you're still here reading this, that tells me something about you. It tells me you're not content with the shallow answers. You're not satisfied with the cultural narrative. You're hungry for something deeper, something truer, something that honors both the pain and the purpose of this season. You're exactly the woman God is looking for. Not the one who has it all together. The one who's willing to be transformed. The one who's brave enough to let menopause break her open so God can remake her into something even more beautiful. This is your season. Not the end of your story, the most powerful chapter yet. You're the grace-filled warrior. And the world is waiting for what you're becoming. Look at what just happened. Look at where you've been in the last 30 minutes. You learned that the hot flash during worship wasn't interruption, it was invitation. You discovered that forgetting scripture doesn't mean God's forgotten you. You found out you're not going crazy. You're just going through something nobody prepared you for. You encountered the verse that reframed everything. I am doing a new thing. You understood that menopause exists by design, not by accident. You heard what Jesus would actually say, grace, not shame. You got practical strategies that honor body, mind, and spirit. You found your people in the support group that saves. You adjusted your faith practices for who you are now, not who you were. You realized this whole season is preparation, not punishment. And you stepped into your new identity, the grace-filled warrior. From exhausted and ashamed to empowered and anchored. From thinking you were finished to knowing you're just beginning. From carrying this alone to walking it with community. That's not a small shift. That's transformation. And here's the quotable moment I want you to screenshot, to write down, to carry with you. Your faith story isn't over. It's just learning to flow instead of force. You're not losing yourself in menopause. You're discovering who you were always meant to become. So here's my question for you today, and I really want you to sit with this. What will you change right now, not tomorrow, not next week, but today too? Step into the flow of God's purpose for this season of your life. Will you finally schedule that doctor's appointment? Will you reach out to start that support group? Will you forgive yourself for not being perfect through this transition? Will you declare out loud that you're a grace-filled warrior? What's the one thing? Because here's what I know about you. You didn't watch all 30 minutes of this video by accident. You're here because something in your spirit is hungry for more. You're here because you refuse to believe the cultural lie that your value expires at menopause. You're here because deep down, you know God's not finished with you yet. And you're right, He's not. If this journey moved you, if even one chapter shifted something in your heart, hit that subscribe button right now, because we're not done. There are thousands of women just like you walking this path, and we're building something beautiful together. A community of grace-filled warriors who refuse to suffer in silence, who choose authenticity over performance, who believe their best chapters are still being written. Tell me in the comments, what's your one commitment from today? What's the single thing you're going to change, release, embrace, or declare? Write it down, Make it real. I read every single comment, and I promise you I'll be cheering you on. And here's the final truth I want to leave you with. You're not alone in this. Thousands of women just like you are on this path. We're doing this together. We're rewriting the narrative. We're showing the next generation what it looks like to age with grace and grit. We're proving that menopause isn't the end of purpose. It's the refining fire that burns away everything that isn't essential, so what remains is pure gold. You are that gold. You're being refined. You're being prepared. You're being transformed into exactly who God always intended you to be. So take a deep breath, look in the mirror, and say it one more time. I am a grace-filled warrior. My faith story isn't finished, and God is doing a new thing in me right now. May you walk into this week with your head held high. May you extend to yourself the same grace God extends to you. May you find your people and tell your truth. May you discover that your weakness is where His strength lives. And may you never, ever forget, you are loved, you are chosen, you are equipped, and you are exactly where you're supposed to be. This isn't the end of your story, beloved. It's the beginning of your most powerful chapter yet. Go be the grace-filled warrior you were created to be.